Nietzsche reveals what really happens when you leave the crowd, what happens when you leave the crowd. Not metaphorically, literally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. When you stop marching to the rhythm of 1,000 feet, step out of formation, and ask yourself, where was I even going in the first place? This video isn't just about leaving society or rebelling against norms. It's about something far more terrifying and far more beautiful, becoming an individual. Becoming what Nietzsche called the Übermensch, not a superhuman in strength, but someone who has overcome the limitations of the herd, of morality, of comfort. You're not just walking away from the crowd. You're walking away from everything you've ever used to define yourself, your beliefs, your habits, your validation systems, your excuses. And the moment you do that, something strange happens. You begin to hear your own voice again. But it's faint, distant, almost alien. Because it's been drowned out for so long by the noise of everyone else's expectations. Let's not romanticize this. Leaving the crowd is not glorious at first. But it's not a sunrise of freedom, it's a disorienting darkness. You think you'll find yourself, but what you find first is confusion. Who am I now that I'm not part of them? What do I believe now that I'm not echoing their slogans or subscribing to their values? Nietzsche warned us, the price of becoming who you are is often isolation. The crowd gives you warmth, but it also gives you blindness. It gives you comfort, but it takes your clarity. So the question becomes, what do you want more? Comfort or clarity? Warmth or truth? I remember the moment I realized I was still living someone else's life. I was chasing goals I didn't choose, defending ideas I never examined, and surrounding myself with people who were just as lost as I was but pretending not to be. And then I asked myself the question Nietzsche dares all of us to ask: what if your beliefs are nothing more than the opinions of your time that passed down to you like hand-me-down clothes? That's when I stepped away. And that's when the real journey began, not toward freedom, but toward responsibility. Because being free isn't about doing whatever you want. It's about owning the consequences of your own values. Now ask yourself, have you ever truly had a thought that wasn't borrowed? Have you ever wanted something that didn't come from advertising, peer pressure, or tradition? This isn't judgment, it's revelation. Most of us are not thinking. We are being thought by the crowd, by the culture, by the algorithm. And walking away from that, truly walking away, isn't just hard. It's revolutionary.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But let's be honest. The crowd is seductive. It offers identity, belonging, simplicity. It tells you what's right and wrong, who to love and hate, what success looks like, and what failure feels like. And the moment you step away, you lose all that. There's no map, no applause, no one waiting to congratulate you. You become, in Nietzsche's words, a rope over an abyss, suspended between what you were and what you might become. And it's in that terrifying in-between that you have to forge your own meaning. Why is that so hard? Because meaning is heavy. That's why the crowd gives you a pre-made one. It's like buying furniture that's already assembled. It saves you time, but it doesn't fit your soul. Nietzsche believed that only by creating our own values can we become truly free. Not free from rules, but free to create rules that align with who we really are. But that means stepping into the unknown. It means risking being misunderstood, rejected, even hated. And that's where most people turn back. So, let me ask you something deeply uncomfortable. What are you pretending to believe because it's safer than saying, I don't know? What masks are you wearing because being seen as you truly are would be too vulnerable? What crowd are you still standing in not because it inspires you, but because it protects you from the responsibility of being alone? Here's the part no one tells you. Leaving the crowd doesn't just reveal who you are, it reveals who you're not. And that's painful. You realize how much of your identity was built on imitation. But that pain, that loss, that confusion, it's a sign you're finally waking up. It's a sign you're beginning the most important journey of your life, not toward fame, success, or status, but toward authenticity. You begin to develop what Nietzsche called the will to power, not power over others, but power over your own instincts, fears, and illusions. You start to build an inner fortress. You stop asking, is this allowed? And start asking, is this true for me? And that shift changes everything. You stop needing validation from the outside because you've begun to cultivate something far more rare, inner certainty. But beware, this path isn't for everyone, because people want freedom until they realize it comes with no guarantees, no safety nets, no backup plans. That's why Nietzsche said, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. And that struggle? It never ends. But neither does the growth. Neither does the clarity. Neither does the beauty of becoming someone who thinks, speaks, and acts from the deepest parts of their own being. Now I challenge you, where in your life are you still choosing the crowd over your conscience? Where are you still outsourcing your truth to people who don't even know who they are? And most importantly, what would it cost you to walk away? Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Could you do it? Would you? The loneliness of truth. Why most people run back to the crowd. When you leave the crowd, you don't just leave people. You leave certainty. You leave the warmth of shared illusions, and in their place, you find silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that echoes. The kind that asks questions no one around you is willing to answer. This is where most people falter. They take a few steps into solitude, feel the weight of their own mind pressing down on them, and they run. Not because they're weak, but because they were never trained to live without noise. We live in a world that medicates silence, distracts from discomfort, and sells belonging as if it can be bought. But truth, hey, real truth, it has no price tag, no applause, no crowd. Nietzsche understood this deeply. He knew that the moment you begin to think for yourself, you exile yourself from comfort, and you become a foreigner to your former life. You look around and realize that most conversations are performances, most friendships are agreements not to go too deep, and most beliefs are borrowed. And when you try to share your new insight, when you try to speak truth, you're not met with understanding. You're met with resistance, because your freedom threatens their illusion. Your clarity exposes their confusion, and people don't like mirrors that reflect too honestly. This is why so many people return to the crowd. Not because the crowd changed, but because solitude revealed too much. It showed them how fragile their identity really was. It showed them that without the roles, titles, and social approval, they had no idea who they were. And instead of building a new identity from the ground up, they run back to the old one, even if it doesn't fit. Even if it suffocates them. Because at least it's familiar. But here's the secret Nietzsche whispers to those willing to listen. Loneliness is the doorway to self-possession. It's in that aching space where no one's watching, no one's validating, and no one's rescuing that you finally meet yourself. Not the version of you that performs for approval, but the version of you that's raw, unfiltered, and often terrifying. And if you can sit with that, if you can resist the urge to escape, you begin to transform. The loneliness doesn't go away. It becomes sacred. It becomes a crucible. Because now, every insight you gain was earned. Every value you hold was tested. Every decision you make is yours, not borrowed, not inherited, not imposed. And that kind of ownership, it's rare. It's powerful. It's magnetic. People will sense it in you. They won't always understand it, but they'll feel it. And some will be drawn to it, not because you reflect what they already believe, but because you remind them of a freedom they forgot they had. Still, don't expect to be celebrated. Nietzsche was mocked, ignored, and misunderstood in his lifetime. He died alone, mentally broken, materially poor but spiritually rich. He left behind not a blueprint for how to live, but a challenge: dare to live without one. Dare to create your own. Dare to craft a life so deeply yours that it doesn't need to be explained. Ask yourself, when was the last time you sat in silence, with no music, no phone, no conversation, just you? What did you discover there? Did you stay long enough to find the truth beneath the discomfort? Or did you run back to the noise, to the memes, to the scrolling? If you're honest, most of us are terrified of knowing ourselves. Because to know yourself is to confront every lie you've told to survive. But what if loneliness isn't the enemy? What if it's the invitation? An invitation to finally become the kind of person who doesn't need the crowd to feel real. The kind of person who can walk through the world not seeking validation but radiating authenticity. The kind of person who can hold the tension of being misunderstood without collapsing. Now ask yourself, if you knew that the truth would isolate you, would you still pursue it? If your deepest convictions made you an outsider, would you still speak them? And if your authenticity meant losing everything you once called home, would you still choose it? Rebuilding the self from the ashes of belonging to the fire of becoming once you've left the crowd and endured the silence of isolation, something remarkable begins to stir. It's subtle at first, like the flicker of a flame in the ashes after a storm. The old self, the one you built from other people's expectations, begins to fall away. And in its place, you're given the raw material of something new, not a ready-made identity, but the responsibility to create one. And this is where the real work begins. This is the fire of becoming. Nietzsche didn't believe in passive self-discovery. He didn't think you could simply find yourself like a lost set of keys. No, for him, the self is something you build. You don't stumble upon it, you forge it in the furnace of your own choices. You sculpt it through trial, contradiction, and courage. You wrestle with your instincts, test your values against reality, and carve your path not by imitation, but by will. This process is not neat. It's messy. It's painful. But it's real. We live in a time that talks endlessly about authenticity. But most of what passes for authenticity is just performance in a different costume. True authenticity isn't about being accepted for who you are. It's about being willing to not be accepted. It's about building an identity so honest, so aligned with your inner truth, that you're willing to let go of every false belonging that gets in the way. And that includes your past. That includes your heroes. That includes even your former self. There's something you need to understand here. When you leave the crowd and begin to rebuild yourself, you will not become who you thought you were. You'll become someone else entirely. Because the person you used to be was built for approval. The person you're becoming is built for truth. And truth doesn't always win you praise. In fact, it often costs you everything. But what you gain in return is worth infinitely more: integrity. Now, this isn't a solitary journey forever. It's not about permanent isolation. It's about earning your place in the world again, but this time as someone who doesn't need it. It's about returning to society, not as a follower, but as a creator. Nietzsche imagined the Übermensch not as someone who escapes humanity, but someone who redefines it. Someone who brings new values, new visions, new energy to a world trapped in old patterns. But you can't do that if you're still trying to fit in. You can only do it once you've shed the need to belong. So ask yourself, what parts of you are still performing? What beliefs do you hold because they make you feel safe, not because they're true? What dreams are still hand-me-downs from parents, teachers, influencers, or fears? This is where the fire begins to burn. Because every lie you let go of makes room for a deeper truth. Every layer you peel back gets you closer to the core. And at that core is something terrifyingly powerful: freedom. But freedom is not just the absence of rules. It's the presence of responsibility. You are not just free from the crowd, you are now responsible for your own values, your own meaning, your own becoming. And that's the scariest part. Because there's no one left to blame. No system, no parents, no society. Just you and your will and your choices. This is where transformation happens. When you stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What must I become?" When you stop chasing pleasure and start pursuing purpose, not the kind handed to you by culture, but the kind you wrestled from the depths of your own soul. That's the moment you stop living a life of reaction and begin living a life of creation. So I ask you, what would it look like to rebuild your life, not from expectation, but from intention? If you had to start over right now, stripped of all labels, all status, all history, who would you choose to become? And more importantly, what's stopping you from becoming that person today? The final trial, why the world fears the one who stands alone. By now, you've walked away from the crowd. You've endured the loneliness, the silence, the unraveling. You've begun to burn away the false self and rebuild something real, something forged in the fire of your own becoming. But there is one more trial, one final confrontation with the world you left behind. And it's the hardest of them all, not because of what it will do to you, but because of how it will see you. The world fears the one who stands alone. Not because that person is dangerous in the traditional sense, but because they represent a threat to the entire structure the crowd depends on. When you no longer seek approval, you reveal how many others are slaves to it. When you live by your own truth, you expose the cowardice of conformity. When you become free, you force others to confront the fact that they are not. And that confrontation makes you a target not of violence, but of suspicion, misunderstanding, and quiet rejection. You may find others along the way. Not many, but a few. People who have also walked away, who burned down their former selves, who know the silence, the fire, the fear, and the freedom. These are your true peers. Not because they agree with you, but because they see you. And in that mutual recognition, a new kind of belonging emerges. One not based on sameness, but on shared courage. So here's the final question. Do you have the strength to be misunderstood? And to be alone, not out of arrogance, but out of integrity? To live a life so true to yourself that even if no one applauds it, you would still choose it? Because in the end, that's what Nietzsche reveals. When you leave the crowd, you don't find certainty. You find the chance to create meaning. And that is the highest form of freedom a human being can ever know. Now, what will you do with it?